Hey, everybody, welcome back to Miles and Mentors. If you're in the industry and trying to grow and expand your business, there's probably some legal stuff to worry about. And we have an excellent guest on today that's going to help walk us through not just his journey, but his insights into the industry that we can pass along to you. So stick with us. We have a great episode for you right after this on Miles and Mentors.
Welcome to Miles and Mentors, the podcast that humanizes trucking, getting real-life advice and insights from logistics professionals from all over the industry. We sit down with those seasoned mentors who have put in the miles with a mission to pass on the knowledge gained from years in the industry to you. Now buckle up and enjoy the show.
Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks so much for being here today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me. It's a great time to talk about the industry and all the exciting and interesting things happening.
100%, man. I've been keeping up with everything that you do, so I'm excited to have a chat with you today for sure. And logistics is one of those interesting industries, right? Because there's a ton of regulations, meaning you've got a little bit of work cut out for you, right?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing about transportation is one of the most common jobs in America is to drive a truck. And the regulations behind that are something that we are expected to know. And yet they do change. There's ELD mandates, there's nuclear verdicts, there's different hours of service, compliance issues. And I try to stay on top of it to help people understand how the law intersects with supply chain. Because just like supply chain, you can't opt out of it. You can't opt out of the law either.
100%. Well, if you don't mind, let's kind of start at the beginning. What brought you to the logistics industry in the first place? Why are you here and why have you stayed?
That's a great question. So my father started at Roadway back in 1976. This is before deregulation when three trucking companies moved America: Yellow, Roadway, and CF. And he spent 15 years at Roadway before starting his own company back in the early 90s, where he was a maintenance and repair provider for a company called RPS, Roadway Package Systems. Now, RPS was Roadway's answer to UPS, a parcel carrier without having the challenge of unionized workers. That company became FedEx Ground. So I have grown up in the transportation business. I got out of law school in 2010 and became a lawyer representing trucking companies in catastrophic accidents. So I've always been near and dear to my heart the challenge of safely delivering freight on time and undamaged. So once I got into the business, there really wasn't a way to get out of it. So I've spent my time in equipment, I spent my time in maintenance and law, and I'm just happy to be here and talk about these issues that are really important for everybody.
I love that. I love that story. Kind of, being ingrained into your life and then not taking the trucking route, but coming right back into logistics in a really needed manner. Now, when you got your degree and you became a lawyer, was there any anticipation to like go a different route, or was this always in your sights?
So the reality was when I came out of law school in 2010, the market was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. There were not a lot of opportunities. And so the companies that were hiring tended to be in the insurance defense world. And insurance defense is when something happens, your insurance company hires a lawyer on your behalf to protect you in court. And that's what I did. I did toxic tort litigation, manufacturing liability. All of that was very interesting, but it was really kind of depressing work that you get into. The worst day of a trucking company was my every single day. And so I got a chance to go into my father's company as general counsel, and I represented outsourced fleet services and well as did business development for them. So we ran that company together for 6 years until we sold it back in 2018. So I always knew I wanted to serve people and serve others. And
Right.
this opportunity in transportation, once I got a hold of it, I just never let go.
What a fantastic experience. I love that, man. Now, obviously, as we mentioned, and I'm kind of put this at the forefront, you're the expert here. So if we need to fit in some topics, make sure to butt in, because I've said this with a handful of mentors here, and I'm anticipating from what I've watched and just knowing the topic that we're approaching here. This is one we could probably go on for like 25 episodes. I mean, obviously, you've got your own show. Like there's a lot of content here. So we've got a lot to cover. But I'm interested for drivers starting out as owner operators, making that merge, wanting to grow their business. Like, what are those initial legal concerns that they should be looking out for that many don't?
I mean, the number one thing to talk about when it comes to operating a motor vehicle, but beyond simply buying a truck or leasing a truck is making the corporate form. And let me be very clear. Nothing I say today is intended for legal advice. Nothing establishes an attorney-client relationship. If you think you need a lawyer, you probably do. And it's most certainly not me. So with that disclaimer in place, once you have that corporate structure and you understand, are you a sub S corporation, you an LLC, you need to think about insurance. And insurance is something that every single motor carrier must have. The FMCSA, they're in part of and parcel to this. The number that you have to have legally to haul interstate goods is $750,000. That number was established in 1980. It has never been adjusted for inflation. It has never been increased. Generally speaking, if you get the bare minimum, there are brokers and there are shippers who simply will not work with you. You make that decision to keep your cost low, and there's a vast array of customers that you will simply not have access to. And a lot of motor carriers don't necessarily understand that when they start off. They think, let's just keep it cheap and cheerful, not realizing that they're going to lose opportunities for hauling for some of the best companies in the country.
Right. Now, it's interesting. You talked a little bit about the structure there, and I'm gonna bring this up just because I've seen it on TikTok and stuff recently that's gotten looped in with truck drivers. Now, when looking at the best way, because there's a lot of different options on how to, make your company legal, is LLC still a solid route? Because I've heard the argument that LLC is not technically a company and this and that. What is your insight into kind of the best route, especially for trucking?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reality is, LLCs are real companies. They're limited liability companies. Every single state allows them, and there's an act in each state that kind of creates them. The way to look at it is that entity didn't exist, let's say 50 years ago. You had to be a corporation. And if you were a corporation, you were either a C Corp, you were taxed twice, taxing your profits and then taxing your dividend, or you were what they call a sub S. It was an IRS designation that was like a pass-through taxation. Sub S corporations function very similar to what we call LLCs today. Now, can a lawyer pierce the corporate veil? That's to say, if you're a limited liability company and I want to tag you individually, can I do it? Maybe. It depends on, are you adequately insured? It depends on how you commingle your funds. So there is a path, and I would urge anybody who's looking to get into the business, learn about what LLCs are for your state, consult with an attorney. It's probably an hour-long conversation, maybe $500, something like that, and it'll help you understand where your liabilities are at. And then obviously an accountant can help you understand the tax implications. But yes, they're absolutely real. Who's ever saying that an LLC is not a real company? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, it's wild, but it's one of those things. There's literally like whole channels out there just devoted to it. And it's 2024, so you've got clickbait everywhere.
That's
but
right.
I've seen a lot of truckers get kind of drawn into that conversation. So always healthy when, especially not being in the legal front and so many options being thrown at you, trying to set up that foundation somewhat firmly when you first get started out there.
Absolutely. And it's important just to keep a note. Like one of the things we may talk about, we may not, is independent contractor versus an employee. And if you're a sole proprietor versus an incorporated business, one of the big hallmarks that we look for in the law is, do you have a corporate form? If you're an individual person and you're doing everything as if you're just the individual giving your social security number to the person who's paying you, it's more difficult to prove that you're not an employee under those circumstances. So if you have a corporate form, it is a benefit for the brokers you work with, for the shippers you may work with, to have the corporate form. It's just a nice thing that it shouldn't be that it's so rare, but it is one of the most effective ways to say, no, I am a business. I am not just some random sole proprietor.
Excellent. Now, I definitely want to jump over to the clearinghouse, but I got one quick question kind of while we're on that topic. Now, with guys that are going, let's say they've been working as a company driver and they've branched out. Now they're an owner operator. Maybe they're looking to take on multiple trucks, et cetera. From the point of being that owner operator, that, sole proprietor, and then taking on employees and such, what are some of the illegal implications that you got to worry about in trucking at that point as you kind of expand out?
I mean, this is a really good question. It's going to take some time to unpack, but when you are an employee, there are certain things that you are not responsible for. For example, general liability insurance, workers' compensation insurance, paid time off. These are things that are given to you on behalf of you by your employer, unemployment insurance. So if you get fired, you can collect unemployment. If you get injured, you can collect workers' comp. The idea of going to be an independent contractor is not a new idea. This is pretty common. If you look at the driver from FedEx Ground who comes to your house, or the Amazon driver, those people do not work for Amazon. They are agents of another company. And so when you become an owner operator, the challenge may be that maybe you make more money at the top line, but there's a lot of things that you're maybe not anticipating. If you get hurt, how do you take care of yourself? You probably have to buy a disability policy to help you because there's no workers' comp you can file against. If your customer fires you, or that they close down, there's no unemployment for you. So there's a really big, interesting shifting of responsibility. And I'd say, besides containerization, like the idea that you can move everything across the world with a 20-foot or 40-foot steel box, the biggest innovation in our industry was the independent contractor model. It allowed big companies to really lower their operational cost. When you talk about trucking, the biggest expenses you have are your fuel is your biggest, your labor is number 2, assets are number 3, maintenance is 4, and then tires and insurance compete for 5th and 6th position. So the goal was, how do we lower the cost of trucking? And that was independent contractors. That's why we had the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 and the explosion of different trucking companies all across this country.
Dude, I think this is so fantastic. And one of the reasons I've been so excited to get you on here and have a personal conversation, right? I think for this industry, and especially with an industry that, with so many owner operators and business owners of that sense, there's a lot of unknown that we just jump into. And it's important to have that firm foundation. We've factored a lot of episodes around, especially going to the owner operator side. There's a lot of money in trucking, but then you've also got to realize there's also a lot of expense in trucking. So finding that balance, but then understanding taking on a business, there's a lot of liability in trucking.
Oh, absolutely. We'll talk all about that.
I mean, there's just so much you got to be prepared for. And it's, not to scare anyone away and say this isn't the path. It is a very lucrative business, but you've got to make sure you're protected in all assets. You got to make sure that you look at all these different avenues and talk to professionals, mentors, and all those different ways to really make sure that you're lined up for success.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. What I like to tell people is, like, you have no idea where you're going unless you know where you are. And you don't know where you are unless you know where you've been. And this is the story of supply chain, is a story of history and watching these things as they unfold, because the problems we see in this business are not accidental. They're not bugs in our supply chain. They're features. And you see the vehicle out of service rate is a great example. You see the minimum insurance requirements is another great example that tells a story of meat in a grinder in this business. And you see verdicts, hundreds of millions of dollars, and there is not a single owner operator who could survive anything remotely like that. And so I love to come on programs and kind of explain to people why it is the way that it is, and then hopefully take away and say, there are ways to make it different or better, but it's important that we know where we came from.
Love it, man. Now, obviously, big changes coming to the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. And I recently read a fantastic article that you were involved with. And if you wouldn't mind, just give us a high level, like what's going on? What should we be expecting with this?
Yeah, I'd say that so the clearinghouse, there's a great lawyer who I'm going to plug here. I'm going to shamelessly plug other attorneys who you should absolutely be following. So for anyone who's watching this or listening to this podcast, Brandon Wiseman, he's a lawyer at a company called Truck Safe. He's a partner of the Childress law firm. He also has a company called E-Regs, which is FMCSA regulations. The change with the clearinghouse, and I am not an expert on clearinghouse stuff, so I'll be very clear with that. Brandon's got some great stuff. Actually, in 2 weeks, he's on my podcast explaining those regulations to me. But it is a combination of marijuana use becoming ubiquitous in this country. There are so many states now that have the ability to purchase and utilize marijuana legally. And so now you have this wrestling battle of What do you do with someone who fails a test? Where do you go with these drivers? Can they go work in trust state? Can they continue to operate commercial vehicles? And the estimates are very difficult to fully understand. It could be the case that 100,000 drivers are taken out of the pool, and that could be a very interesting thing in a market that is, let's say, saturated to an extent with motor carriers. And so this is it's a benefit, and it's a double-edged sword, because you will see more drivers leave the business, and you will also see the rates probably rise alongside this. But like I said, this is a very interesting time in our industry.
100%, man. Now, this industry is one, like we talked about, being so heavily regulated, and all that falls back to legality, right? When it comes to a business really protecting their assets, their liability, what are some of the strongest ways to really start out your business, like from the ground? How do you go about that? Like, where should they be looking?
Let me tell a story, because
Yeah.
I want people to really understand what we're talking about. The most important legal case happening right now in our industry is down in Texas. And on December 3rd of this year, there's an oral argument taking place regarding this case. Let me tell you about the case. This is the case of Werner Enterprises, a massive motor carrier that had a terrible accident happen. Here are the facts. It's snowing. The driver for Werner is operating below the posted speed limit. They've been on the payroll for Werner as a driver for about 7 days. In the berth of that truck is their trainer. The trainer is sleeping. For those who are unfamiliar with this industry, that is how it works with trainers. Trainers are not awake watching you drive the entire time. Our industry does not support that kind of operating cash to be able to do 3 people in a truck. They operate like a team. And in this context, the driver is operating under the posted speed limit. The trainer is asleep. In the opposite lane of the traffic is another vehicle. That vehicle is going too fast for conditions. How do we know they're going too fast for conditions? They lose control. They spin out. They cross 10 yards of median, and then they collide head on with the Werner Enterprises truck. In that moment, one child dies and one child is paralyzed. And the question is, who's responsible? Who's responsible? It went to jury. And at the jury, this is the liability that was found. The driver for Werner, the trucker, was found to be 14% responsible. The driver for that pickup truck that lost control, that crossed the center line, that hit the truck, was found to be 16% responsible. Now, I'm not a mathematician, I'm a lawyer, but that number is not 100. That number is 30. 70% liability was found for Werner. And that dollar amount was $100 million. Now, Werner appealed. They went to the appellate court in Texas and they said, please reverse this. This is wrong. And the appellate court said, interesting, we're not doing that. And the verdict stood. Now that interest has compounded. That interest with the verdict is now $130 million. It is now in front of the Texas Supreme Court. December 3rd is when it's being argued. If you are a motor carrier, you can be found liable in some cases when you have done nothing wrong. This industry is dangerous. There's no doubt about that. But cases like this make it impossible to operate. You will see interest, the rates for insurance increase dramatically because these cases do not seem to be slowing down. It is the most important case in our industry. The ATA, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, all of them have filed briefs with the court arguing in behalf of Werner, but we do not know the outcome. And this case really shines the light and says, this is the type of liability you can face. If you want to come into this business, understand that one bad day and you're done. And it's not just you're done because your insurance is maxed out. You're done because they'll come after your truck and they'll come after your home and they'll make sure that you go bankrupt. That is the nature of these types of litigation.
That's wild. And that's definitely one to keep up with. Now, obviously, you said it's going to go before and there's more conversation to be had there, but can you give us any insight into their justification of finding Werner responsible?
Oh, it's amazing. The first thing that they say is that Werner didn't have access to a CB radio. The driver couldn't be on the radio and hear that other drivers were going slower. That was one of the things. Another thing was this idea of the team driver, the driver who's relatively new, having his boss asleep in the back. That's our industry every day, but
Sure.
it was kind of surprising to the jury. I think, and this is probably more hypothesis or conjecture, you don't take a case to trial with a dead kid. You just don't. Like, you're not going to win that. No jury's going to be like, well, you're right. They were pretty careless, and ultimately that's the reason this thing happened. But the argument was, look, if Werner had been going 10 or 20 miles an hour slower, then maybe it wouldn't have been so dramatic. Maybe it wouldn't have been a death at all. And so that's the argument. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the case has to be reversed, but if it doesn't, it'll be very difficult to be a motor carrier going through Texas, which is a massive market.
That's wild to think about. And that's a lot to unpack. Depending how that goes, what do you think the implications are to the industry with how that turns out?
I think the implication is going to be that it's going to cost more to operate a truck. Like, ultimately, who pays for this is the drivers who are able to afford insurance. You're going to continue to pay. Werner is big. They self-insure a big portion of that verdict, but then they have an umbrella policy that comes in and takes on the remainder. I think that case, and you look at like the Wabash case, we'll probably talk about that a little bit. It really tells the story that the American public, if you're in the wrong jurisdiction, can hold you responsible for things that you really have no control over. It's, imagine you're driving home from work and someone crosses the center line, hits you. Are you at fault? Under that theory, under Werner's, yeah, you're at fault. And that's bananas. It's bananas.
I mean, that's one of those things, right? Like when we started out talking about having that firm foundation, you can probably sit down and, well, not you, because you have legal experience, but the average guy starting out a company, like even if you've worked for a company and you've tried to learn as much as you can sit there and have a pretty good list of, okay, this is what I need to prepare for. This is what I need to watch out for. But at the end of the day, there is a scrollable list of things that you just do not foresee, and being that huge reason why you need experts in those areas to help make sure that, you are covered. And that's not even, I guess, touching situations like this that go totally left field.
The best you can do as a driver is make sure you do good pre and post trip inspections. Like,
Yeah.
That's the key. That is your best weapon when it comes to avoiding liability in something bad. Is you take your job as a professional driver seriously. You make sure that your lights are working, that your brakes are functioning, that your tires have enough tread depth. Those are simple things. I mean, I'm going to scare you for a second if you haven't heard about these numbers, but International Road Check happened a couple of months ago. The results came in September. And for those who don't know, International Road Check is put on by the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. They inspect a bunch of vehicles during this blitz period. And every year, a number comes out that makes people kind of uncomfortable. And I want people to know this number. 23% of all commercial vehicles that were inspected during International Road Check, almost 1 in 4, were found to be unsafe at any speed. They had critical safety defects. Oh, I mean, on average, that is every year is between 20 and 23, 24%. And we as an industry wring our hands saying, oh, these lawyers are just taking. No, we're the ones who aren't doing what we're supposed to do. And even the international, even like the average for the FMCSA, it's like 21.6%. And I use this analogy. Imagine I'm a grocery store and I have 5 gallons of milk and I say one of these gallons of milk is unsafe. You'd say, Matt, I appreciate you. You seem like a nice guy. I don't want to buy milk from you. And I'd say, that's your choice. You don't get to have that choice. You have to buy what I'm selling. And that's our industry. 1 in 5 commercial vehicles at any time have problems with their brakes, their lights, their tires, and they're unsafe at any speed. That is the reality that we live in.
So much to worry about there. I mean, 100%. And that's why they need to watch and tag along with guys like you to try to keep that insight, because so much going on in the industry.
Well, have you heard about the Wabash case? Have you followed that case at all?
No, I'm curious though. You did bring that up, and I'm curious now. Let me know.
Okay. This case, I mean, I'm glad you're sitting down, because if you weren't sitting down, you'd fall over. Here's the story. Wabash makes a trailer in 2004 When they made that trailer, it had a rear impact guard. We call them ICC bumpers. They're the big metal tube at the back of the trailer.
Yeah.
When those were made at that time, the legal requirement was those rear impact guards had to prevent an underride at 30 miles an hour or slower. For those who don't know the word underride, it is a disinfected way of saying decapitation. If you don't have a rear impact guard and you hit the back of that trailer, you lose your head. Now, that number changed a couple of years ago. Now it's 35 miles an hour and below. These must prevent underride. In 2019, a trailer operated and owned by GDS Express was stopped. A vehicle traveling 55 miles an hour smashes into the back of that trailer. Now, these two facts that I'm going to say were not given to the jury, and I'll explain why they weren't in a second. But when I tell them, this is the part people get surprised about. The driver had a blood alcohol content double the legal limit, and neither the driver or the passenger had seatbelts. Now, both of those people died. Both of them died. And the question was, who's at fault? Who's responsible? Well, the estates, the family, the people who were family members of the deceased, they have this estate that they control. The estates sued the GDS Express company. GDS Express went bankrupt. They went away. But Wabash was still there. And they said to the jury, Wabash knew or should have known that this rear impact guard was not strong enough to survive or prevent a 55 mile an hour underride, which is not the legal limit in the federal system. It's not. The legal limit at the time of manufacturing was 30, and the time when it's happening was 35. Neither one of them would have prevented a 55 mile an hour collision. The verdict came back. $462 million against Wabash. $462 million. And how did they get to that number? Each estate, the two decedents, got $6 million. $6 million. That is the value of a life. That is what they call compensatory damages. That is, we can't bring your person back to life, but we can give you this chunk of money that is equivalent to their life. That is what the $6 million per person was. And then they said, we need to punish Wabash. And what the punishment was, they said, look, Wabash, because you chose to have a rear impact guard that didn't support a 55 mile an hour underride, you saved $15 million a year. You made $15 million in profit. 15 times 30 years, that's how long you've known about this, gets us to $450 million. Now, there is not a single trailer manufacturer that exists that could survive a verdict of that size. Wabash is a big company, but they're, $2 or $3 billion a year. They're not able to survive this. A couple of things to note. One, Missouri has tort reform. Many drivers hear the story of tort reform. What is tort reform? It is when the legislature changes the rules so that numbers in verdicts get reduced. So Missouri has tort reform. Their number is 5 times compensatory damages. So you take the $12 million times that by 5, that is the total amount they can have together. So $72 million. That is the maximum this could have. But here's how it impacts motor carriers. And I've talked to many motor carriers. If that number is right, 55 mile an hour for a rear impact guard, there is not a trailer on the road today that could likely sustain that. 5 million trailers are defective, if that is correct. That means if you're a motor carrier, do you have to go and have all of your rear impact guards replaced? Can you spend $3,000 or $4,000 to do that? Probably not. And that case is literally like 2 months ago. Like, this is brand new in Missouri. So this is some of the stuff that truckers have to deal with, and it's bananas.
That's a lot to keep your eyes on and really unwrap. I mean, and so much of it happens all the time, right? And then, I mean, especially if you've got a full fleet, like, how do you worry about pull all those in while trying to maintain business? Makes it
impossible. There's no way. I mean, we're looking at motor carriers right now that have operating ratios of like 95%. So like they take in $1, they spend 95 cents. No one has the bandwidth. This, our industry could not sustain this. And so we have to watch these cases, because where you see these cases happen, you will see them explode everywhere else in the country. Lawyers are very innovative. We're very creative. And if we see this, we'll pull that thread. So that case is mind-boggling.
For sure. And, you know, it's It's really making me think about, I mean, even outside the legal implications, just cars need to be so much carefuler around trucks on the highways these days. Like merging over in front of them with no space, coming up on them too fast. Like if you have ever Googled the picture, like you said, without having that guard on the back, that is a bad day. And I see so many people just jump over in front of trucks. It's like they can't stop like you think they can.
This is a great point. So I remember vividly when I was a practicing lawyer for doing the truck accident stuff. I had a client who was a trucking company owner operator, had the minimum insurance of $750,000, and they just changed lanes. They changed lanes, but they didn't see a little sports car in their rear view, and it just smashed into a telephone pole. And that injured person ended up breaking their back, breaking their pelvis, and that went to they ended up, the insurance company said, we'll tender the policy, we'll give you all $750,000. And there were still medical bills, hundreds of thousands of dollars more. And the driver was like, well, what happens with the rest of that verdict? Like, you guys help me? No, we pay you exactly what you've insured yourself for. The rest is on you. And so my advice to anybody in this business, truck drivers do not see you. Maybe they do, but assume that they don't. And assume that 1 in 5 of those vehicles you're near is unsafe. So give them way more space than you think is necessary, because they need that way more than you. And our goal for everybody in this business is to get home in the same condition that you left. We don't want you coming home any other way than the same condition you left. And the way that you do that is to be proactive with your maintenance and be proactive with giving people plenty of space to make their maneuvers.
100%. Now, obviously, you've been all over between what you do professionally, your show, traveling around to all these different conventions. How do you feel the trucking industry, especially on kind of the owner operator side, not so much the big corporations, but the small guys, how do you feel they embrace the legalities of trucking? You feel like it's really looked into, or there's a big gap there?
I think that I look at small motor carriers and I realize that they're the ones that get the shortest end of the stick. Now, you have the most ability to be profitable. You can choose to go slow and prevent wear and tear on your motor and your tires and save on your fuel, but you have the choice of doing that. Big motor carriers don't. They mandate speeds. Big motor carriers mandated ELDs. And when big carriers said everyone should have ELDs, it was the small fleets that got impacted the most by that, because the big guys already did it. They already did the ELDs. The speed regulation, it doesn't seem like it'll happen this year. It feels like that's probably not the case. Maybe next year, but maybe Trump says no to doing that. But for the small owner operator, you have a lot against you. You have to work with brokers most of the time, and brokers don't have to be transparent with you with what they're actually getting from their shippers. And so I feel like there are people out there that are helping educate smaller motor carriers and how to be able to punch above their weight class, but it is a tough business. And as long as you go in there understanding it is never easy to safely deliver freight on time and undamaged, you'll never have enough safe and affordable parking. And ultimately, any changes that happen are going to hurt you the most, because the big guys have already advocated for that because they already did it. That is what makes this so challenging. But that is the overall goal, I would say, of what deregulation was. Break up the big motor carriers, break up some of the unions that were out there, and then ultimately let smaller motor carriers that are more agile capture opportunities. I think 2025 is going to be a phenomenal year for motor carriers. There's no doubt that the spot rates are probably going to go up 15 to 20%, not anytime right away, but end of Q1, maybe beginning of Q2, we will see this new cycle enter. The question is, how long does the upside last? We don't know that, but we'll probably find out.
We could use it. I'm waiting for it. Now, with that in mind, with companies out there, I mean, obviously, there's so much expense in the industry, especially trying to grow your business. Now, legal concerns come with their own cost. Are there any resources out there that a small trucking company can lean on for legal advice and services?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I'm going to once again plug Brandon Wiseman. What he has done with TruckSafe and the videos and the content that he puts out, is second to none. I mean, he takes the proposed regulations, he helps understand them for small motor carriers. It's all for free because this is how he talks about his own company. He breaks down all of the new regs and what they mean for motor carriers. I'm more like the harbinger of death. Like I come in and say, I'm going to make you miserable. And people are like, oh, I didn't realize you're so happy. You seem like a nice guy. I'm like, yeah, I seem like a lot of things, but I'm the harbinger of bad news. But I think Brandon's phenomenal. Adam Wingfield, not on the legal side, but more on like the small carrier side. There's a lot of good information there. I think ultimately, even if the ATA isn't necessarily your best friend, they have some pretty good resources. Same with OIDA. They have some useful things. But I say there's a lot of good resources out there today, and a lot of them are free. You should use them. And if you're going to be in this business and you're going to go a bare minimum insurance and all that, like, just understand, like you're setting yourself up to be less productive than you might otherwise be.
For sure. Now, obviously, change is always among us, and I try to ask this to pretty much everyone we talk to, but I think it's going to be interesting to really get your take on this. Looking in, the next, let's say, 10 to 15 years into the industry, what changes do you see coming, and what legal implications could come along with that, in your opinion?
I think that the biggest change that we are going to see is the rise of autonomous trucks. Now, they have been promised for a very long time, but there's some touchstones that are very useful for you and your audience to understand. Number one, the FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, has put out, let's call them supplemental rules around level 4, which is remote operator, and level 5, which is remote assistant, to understand what we need to have for interstate use of autonomous vehicles. We've seen Governor Newsom in California twice now veto bills that would force a safety driver into every autonomous truck. And then we also know that there are companies right now moving freight with robots. They have safety drivers, but they're moving intrastate, Houston to Dallas, let's say. If you can prove that these things can do so safely, the change in our industry will be like nothing we've ever seen. It'll be like deregulation 2.0. Vast areas of the middle mile could be devoured by autonomous trucks that move from one relay point to another relay point. And even if we have owner operators, they will never be more cost effective than a robot that does not need to eat or sleep or drink or reset or any of that. They can just work. We'll see them probably first, I think, in a big way at the truck terminals, like the yard trucks, the shotters, the shunters, the mules, the terminal tractors. They have a million different names. Outriders, a company to follow and see what they're doing in that space. But automation is coming, and there is no way off of that path. It is a question of when, not a question of if.
Well, now it's interesting, right? Because, we don't know what the future is going to bring, and we see stuff like AI and stuff, and how just rapidly it's growing, and it all kind of links together. It's coming fast, whether we're ready for it or not. But as we just saw with the whole dock worker situation, trying to bear off automation, do you see anything like that happening when this hits the main industry, or how could that roll?
So that's a really good question. Again, we're going to talk about history for a second. If you go back to 1980, between 60 and 70% of truck drivers were unionized. Those drivers were probably Teamsters. When you look at their compensation, it was about $38,000 to $40,000 a year. If you adjust that for inflation, you're talking $120,000, $130,000 a year. That is a manifestly different profession back then than it is now. If we didn't have deregulation, could the unions stop automation in the United States? Of course they could. They could try pretty hard. But in the system today, no, absolutely not. What we're watching with the longshoremen, I think this is a great, we're, again, talk current events and some history. The longshoremen were the most powerful union that has ever been in America. You looked at these men, and they were almost always men, going on these boats by hand, taking pallets off of ships. And the numbers were astonishing. For 1 ton of freight, it would cost $5 to move. That is before containerization. When containerization came to America, it wasn't adopted by the longshoremen. They fought it. They fought it so hard. That's why the port of Oakland exists versus the LA Long Beach. They made a new port to accommodate this technology. the cost for 1 ton was like 15 or 16 cents. It's manifestly different. It's so much more affordable. But the consequence of the containerization movement was that up to 90% of all longshoremen lost their jobs. You didn't need an army of men going on a boat, hand unloading stuff. You had big cranes. And so the question of automation for our ports is, it is not something that they can stop, but they have to do it. They have to fight.
Yeah.
The West Coast longshoremen fought, they fought these things. They worked without a contract. And the East Coast guys watched and said, we are never working without a contract. So we saw this a couple months ago. The longshoremen struck for 3 days. And then they got a 62% wage increase for 6 months. And that, for a 6-year period. But what we saw as Americans was this fight was never about wages. They solved the wages in days. And they said, first, the longshoremen said, we want 70% or 77%. And the U.S. Maritime Alliance said, no, we'll give you a 50%. They're like, forget it, 62, we're all happy. The fight was about automation. And they said, look, we're going to wait until January 15th. That is when we're going to extend our contract. And January 15th, that is when we have to make a decision. And everything we see appears that they will not come to an agreement. And if they decide to strike, America will see for the first time for many people just how powerful organized labor can be. And we will all watch this unfold, and it'll be absolutely fascinating.
You know, that unwraps a whole nother thing. And obviously, well, it's kind of down the road, kind of happening now, but especially as it hits more trucking and we see automation more widespread in that factor, really where that liability falls into play. Is it the programmers? Is it the business owner? A lot of stuff up in the air.
Well, I would say, and I think that's a great question. Like if you look at Kodiak, they say, look, we believe we're going to have product liability for the things that we make. The motor carrier will still have their normal liability for maintaining the truck, maintaining the equipment. That's still going to be on them. So they say, oh, there's actually more insurance that's going to be available. But your point of like programming them to make a decision, when you're a truck driver and you see someone coming at you, you can turn, you can go drive through it, whatever. That's your decision. The robot's not going to have that choice. It's going to make a decision. And the decision is probably going to be preserve the trucker's life, go through the target. And so we will have to see as that develops. Now, the biggest thing I would say on automation that will slow it down is not necessarily the technical capabilities or even the legal liabilities. I think the really big barrier is cybersecurity. So we say, we don't want the longshoremen to shut down the East Coast and Gulf ports. We're going to stop them by replacing them with robots. But what does a hostile foreign actor do? Can they do the same thing? If you build them in a way that they can, that's probably inevitable. And so unless we as an industry and as our government regulators look at this, if you can't ensure some level of cybersecurity protection, I don't see automation being all that interesting. I mean, I think if you can have a hostile foreign actor turn off all of your trucks, you have won the war. And so we need to be very careful of what things we open up, because once that door is open, it never closes.
Oh, for sure. And I think we're getting forced to look at that more and more. But cybersecurity is just one of those factors, one of those liabilities that we talk about that is just so underrated. I mean, it's everywhere, and who knows the implications of what that could really mean. I mean, from going to shutting down the trucks to turning them into weapons, like, good Lord. I mean, there's
absolutely
so much liability there. Now, we've been at this, and like I said from the very beginning, you're one of those guys I could go on for 25 episodes, if not more, just to bridge the topics here. And I'd love to get you back on in the future because there's so much more I'd like to tap into your brain on. Anything you think we've missed that's really important to share today?
I think that the future questions that we have in supply chain are always going to be the same. It's, am I an employee? Am I a contractor? Am I free to make choices, or am I regulated in such a way that I don't get to make those choices? And I think the biggest thing I would always leave people with is do not defer maintenance. Don't defer maintenance on your truck or your trailer. Don't defer maintenance on yourself, your mental health, your physical health. Don't defer maintenance on your friendships and your relationships. This industry is brutal, and it will take every single thing that you have if it can. And it's important to take a beat and understand that everything will keep going no matter what elections happen. Everything is going to continue to move. The sun will rise tomorrow, and just make sure that your truck and your trailer are adequately inspected before and after every use.
Love it, man. Fantastic advice. I want to give you some time to throw in some shameless plugs. How can people get a hold of you, find out what you do, and keep up with you?
I appreciate that. I still kind of struggle with that myself. I'm probably the most prolific on LinkedIn. You can just find me at Matthew Leffler. On Twitter, I'm Armchair Atty, ATTY. Why? Because that's the abbreviation for the word attorney. I'm on TikTok. I'm not great at it. There's mostly things of geckos and maybe my fish, but I'm there too. And then I have the podcast. It's called Fleeting Conversations. I like the pun, Fleeting Conversations. It seems kind of interesting. And then that's probably the most. There's obviously more things, but I'll be at FreightWaves F3 later next week. We're gonna be talking about nuclear verdicts, the Wabash case, the case of Werner, and then also another case for Daimler. There's a lot of interesting things happening. So yeah, I'm happy to talk with anybody. And again, it's a pleasure to be here and kind of break down some of the most interesting topics in supply chain.
That's not fair, man. Right at the end, you got to throw in more cases. Now I'm interested. Now I've got to make it there and find out the tale.
Oh, it's terrifying. It's awful. I can tell it now. I have nowhere to go.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. This is a case that should make everyone pause once again. This case is about Daimler, which is the manufacturer of the most popular truck in the United States, the Freightliner, and also Western Star. What happens in this case was a driver is operating his vehicle. Another vehicle comes from the opposite side of the road, just like Werner. But instead of the driver hitting that vehicle, the driver turns. And when the driver turns, the truck rolls. And when the truck rolls, the cab collapses and it breaks the neck of the driver. Driver's paralyzed from the neck down. And the driver sues the other motorist, and they settle out of court, but they go to Daimler and they say, Daimler, you made an unsafe truck. You made an unsafe truck. And the argument in this case was Daimler actually sold, and they upsold a seat that would allow you to be, when you roll, it would pull you down. It'd pull you down to your seat as you roll. So when that cab collapses, it doesn't break your neck. Now, that upsell was like $1,000. And the motor carrier who bought that truck for that driver did not buy the upgraded seat. And that went to trial. And under the product liability, strict liability case, Daimler was held responsible for $160 million. And the question becomes for all of us in the industry is, when is a safety feature mandatory?
Right. Yeah.
And if it's mandatory, what does that mean for us? Do we all have to then take our trucks and go buy the new seat? Or does Daimler have to pay to install these new seats? And so our technology becomes better and better, safer and safer, but at what cost? Should a Class 8 truck cost you $200,000 or $250,000 because we're going to throw in every single safety feature? I don't know. And that case is, again, very new, probably less than 2 months old. And we're all reacting to this saying, okay, what does that mean for the millions of trucks that are on the road that don't have that seat? Do they have to go get it? Again, like for you drivers out there, your job is very, very hard, even without this stuff. But it's here. It's always happening. And that is the case that Daimler had just recently.
That's wild, man. Leaves you with so much to think about and just wondering how the future is going to pan out. I mean, yeah, if things like that really go to where safety features become an add-on, that can be a really scary thing. I mean, like we see a lot of this with Tesla and stuff, where you can, like, the car works, but you can buy extra options, and all of a sudden you can turn this on, right? Like that's wild to think about.
It's our technology often outpaces our ability to regulate it. So things happen, and then we have to kind of react to those. And what we're going to see, at least in the next couple of months, is the tariffs, or the proposed tariffs will pull in inventory. Shippers will pull stuff in. So we'll see a bump in our spot rates and probably in the contract rates a couple of months after that. And then we see if those tariffs are, people react internationally against them with maybe competitive tariffs against our goods. And it's going to cause a lot of stuff. So like this industry is why we all stay in it, is not because we love it. Some of us do. It's because we thrive off the chaos, and we love the chaos. Like there's nothing else. It's the biggest small industry on the planet, and it's phenomenal.
That's fantastic. I love the aspect about you bringing up the tariffs. That is one thing I'm going to have to twist your arm about and get you back on the show because everyone's anticipating what this is going to mean for the industry. So as we start to see what way this is all going to go, I want to get you back on and have a larger conversation there if you'd have us.
Anytime, anytime. Thank you for having me again. It's a great pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to delight and terrify people with the law around us. And my goal is always to help people understand this stuff because the first path to fixing or changing anything is you have to understand it. And once you understand it, you can do a whole lot of great things with that.
Well, Matthew, I got to say, with all the information that you put out there, and I think this is really the beauty of the modern day with the podcasts, the TikToks, everything. There's so much information out there like never before that can benefit you, can benefit your business and help you grow. The aspect that you're bringing to the industry with the legal and just that like peek into that side of the industry is so valuable, is so necessary. So thank you for everything you do on that side of things to really bring that spotlight to the industry. It's so
I
needed.
appreciate it. That's very thoughtful of you to say. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
No, seriously, man. And thank you for taking some time out of your day today and letting us pick your brain. Looking forward to having you back on. But yeah, till next time, man. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.
All right, everyone out there, thanks for watching. And until next time, stay safe out there.